Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Day 1 of Smart Beginnings 2024. I'm David Cantrell, the OSEP Deputy Director, and I'm thrilled to join you as we embark on this 3-day journey dedicated to enhancing the developmental and educational outcomes for infants, toddlers, children and youth with disabilities, and of course, their families. The Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, is proud to host this virtual mini-conference which brings together educators, administrators, service providers, and families from across the country. Your presence here reflects a shared commitment to improving the lives of our children and also ensuring that they have access to the high-quality education and supports that they deserve. Smart Beginnings is also about building strong foundations for our youngest learners. Over these 3 days, we'll explore strategies to improve academic and developmental outcomes, expand family engagement, and advance equitable access to high-quality early intervention and education through evidence-based practices. Today, we focus on educators and administrators who play a pivotal role in shaping the educational landscape for children with disabilities. Today's sessions cover critical topics that are at the forefront of education today. We explore equity, emphasizing the importance of creating inclusive environments that serve all children, particularly those who have historically been marginalized. Equity is the bedrock of our mission here at OSEP, and we'll discuss practical strategies to dismantle barriers and ensure that every child has an equitable chance to succeed. We'll also address the challenges of managing conflict, whether within our teams, with families, or across our communities. Effective conflict management is essential to maintaining strong, collaborative relationships that keep the best interests of our children at the center of our work. As technology continues to evolve so rapidly, we'll delve into managing artificial intelligence, or AI, in the education environment. AI presents many opportunities, and we'll explore how it can be harnessed to support individualized instruction and advance educational outcomes, while also considering the ethical implications and some potential risks. And finally, we cannot ignore the lasting impact of the COVID pandemic on our children, our service providers, educators, and our systems. As we continue to emerge from the pandemic, we'll reflect on the lessons learned and discuss how we can rebuild stronger, more resilient, and more equitable systems that truly meet the needs of all children. In addition to today's live stream sessions, I'm pleased to share that we have prepared additional video presentations that offer a deeper exploration of the topics and populations highlighted today. These on-demand resources provide an opportunity for you to further engage with the themes discussed and also to gain valuable insights that can be applied in your work. Throughout today's sessions, you'll hear from OSEP leaders and subject matter experts who are at the forefront of these issues. I encourage you to engage fully, ask questions, share your experiences, and connect with your peers. Together, we can make meaningful strides in advancing the quality of education and support provided to children with disabilities. Thank you for your dedication and for being here today. Let's make these smart beginnings count for every child that we serve. So let's get started.
Good morning and welcome to the 2024 Smart Beginnings. My name is Sheila Wells Moreau and I am joined by my colleague Allison Satter. We are here from the National Center on Inclusion Towards Rightful Presence, which is housed within the Swift Education Center at the University of Kansas. This is our team at the Rightful Presence Center. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that as two white women, that Allison and I are, working in equity and justice work, we have relied heavily on our scholars and leaders of color, both within our organization pictured here and other organizations as well. So this is the group that we go to for support and guidance, and to listen and learn from in the development of the work in this center. Today, our session goals are really to help provide an understanding of what Rightful Presence is and what it can look like in your schools. Some of the opportunities that are available at the Rightful Presence Center and how you can work with us through technical assistance. And then also provide you with a resource that is hot off the press and free to use for schools and districts across the country. At the Rightful Presence Center, we have 3 levels of technical assistance. So the first one is our universal technical assistance, and this would consist of things like our knowledge development sites and research that we have conducted at knowledge development sites. We were able to go to schools and districts across the country who are doing it right for the population of students that we are really focused on, which is our dynamic learners. Those would be our students who take alternate assessment based on alternate achievement standards and who are typically those 1% population in our schools with significant cognitive disabilities. So we were able to go into schools and interview the principals and the teachers and parents, look at their school-wide schedule. How did they really set up their system with every student in mind? How did they engage the parents who have typically not shown up to school or been that involved in the school system before? How did they use people and resources differently? How did they think outside the box so that every student was engaged and present in the gen ed classroom? And then we took that information that we learned at those knowledge development sites and we turned them into research briefs and also our implementation guide, which is what Allie will be going over later. The next level of technical assistance is our targeted TA, which that is available to state and local education agencies who are really ready to move from inclusion towards rightful presence to really end those systems of segregation that are happening in schools for our dynamic learners. Thanks to OSEP, we are able to provide at no cost a partnership for approximately 2 days each year to 15 partners a year. And that really is flexible. We have a lot of flexibility in what that can look like. For instance, a few months ago, we worked with the New York City Department of Education with over 100 of their educators and administrators on what rightful presence is and what it can start to look like in their classrooms. We've also partnered with organizations like Midwest Equity Forum on our 10-point equity and justice paradigm and sort of how that can start to look like with their partners that they are working with as well. The last level of technical assistance is our intensive TA, which is a multi-year partnering with selected SEAs and LEAs and schools to really demonstrate how the center, the needs of the students, the families and the communities who have been kept in the margins. Really working to implement all of those inclusive practices that we are focused on in this center to move from that level of rightful presence from inclusion. So the partners in this work for our intensive TA are the Delaware Department of Education, the New Mexico Public Education Department, Orange County Department of Education via the California Department of Education, as well as the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. So in the last year of this project, we really worked at the SEA and the district level to start that capacity building. And then this fall, we actually get to go out into the schools that we're partnering with and really start to do the fun part of this work. So we are very excited to partner with all of these states and LEAs to really start inclusive practices towards rightful presence for this population of students. Our goals of our intensive work with our states and school districts is to implement systems and policies and practices that move their schools towards that rightful presence for some of the students who have been most segregated in our nation, our dynamic learners. We do that by being not only their technical support for inclusive practices and policies, but also by helping to advance the school's team implementation and fidelity of inclusive practices towards rightful presence, and then making sure that they are sustainable so that when we are no longer hand in hand with our schools and districts, that everything that we have implemented still keeps continuing. We are doing this also by improving and increasing not only the time, but also the engagement and the quality of instruction for students in this population that's happening in the gen ed settings, which is really important. So we have really lofty goals that I know we will accomplish, but now Allie is going to give you more information around what rightful presence is and some of the resources that we already have available to you.
Thank you, Sheila. So for those of you who are wondering, what do we mean by rightful presence? Where is this word coming from? I'm going to go over a little bit of the definition and the description of rightful presence. And as Sheila said, this work is really informed by others. We were largely informed and inspired by some of the work of Angela Calabrese-Barton and Edna Tan on how they were looking at rightful presence at the classroom level. And now we're really conceptualizing that. What does that look like at a systems level for schools? And so let's take a look at this definition and then talk a little bit about rightful presence and what that means and maybe how that's different from inclusion for those of you who are maybe thinking, wait, I thought this was the Inclusion Center. So I'm going to just begin by reading this definition and then kind of calling out some of the specific components of it. So we believe an environment conducive to learning and personal growth is established first and foremost through the cultivation of a culture of true belonging. Efforts toward that goal must begin with the presumption of the rightful presence and inherent value of the disenfranchised. Inclusion efforts alone cannot bring about substantial change because they adhere to the same guest-host power dynamic that serves to normalize the existence of a group who is invited and a group with the power to invite. So if we look at this a little bit more closely, you're going to notice some things that stand out. First of all, you may notice that nowhere in this definition does it specifically say the word disability. That doesn't mean that we're not talking about students with disabilities. We're talking about really any marginalized groups, and we know that students with significant cognitive disabilities are often the most segregated. And we know how important it is to really identify the inherent value of this group of students and all marginalized students and make sure that they belong as a culture of true belonging. Part of that is sort of when we're distinguishing between what do we mean by rightful presence and how that's different from inclusion, is we know in our past work with inclusion, and I can speak from even my own experiences, sometimes as an educator, as a special educator, it feels like you're going to meetings and saying, may my student please come into your classroom for this amount of time, or may I please attend this planning meeting with you, or would it be okay for my student to come sit with your students at lunch? And there is this idea of we're asking for permission, we're asking to be invited by somebody else who has the power to make the decisions on whether or not you belong. Rightful presence is really trying to shift that description. So it's not about what do our students have to do to be able to earn their right to be included, but instead that all students have inherent value and that students with significant cognitive disabilities do belong, they are rightfully present, and it's up to us to ensure that the environments are conducive to making sure that their participation is meaningful, and that is not about somebody else inviting or having to meet certain criteria in order to be invited and included. So that's kind of how we're trying to distinguish between what do we mean by rightful presence. I'm going to show you a short video that does a better job of explaining rightful presence than I do.
What is rightful presence? Students come to school with wonderfully diverse identities that are influenced by family, community, and culture. Some of the young people we know and love seem to fit right in, as if the school and classrooms were created for them. Others, not so much. But we spend precious time and resources either trying to make them fit or punishing them if they don't. Rightful Presence is about co-creating schools, classrooms, and curriculum so that educators can join students in an experience that is both meaningful and relevant to their lives.
Okay, so as you saw in the video, it really is just a way to sort of describe what we mean by rightful presence as an example of really making sure that we're honoring all of our students' identities and intersectionalities and cultures and seeing the inherent value in all students, including students with significant cognitive disabilities. And the way that we do that is by making sure that we're really promoting shared power and that we're giving those students the opportunities to be really co-creators in the experiences of their school, and that we're really cultivating this true culture of true belonging for students. So it's not about changing the students to fit into the environment, but making sure that all the students that are within the learning community are participants in developing and creating that learning community and feel like they belong within their larger school community. So now that we know a little bit about what rightful presence is, you may be wondering, okay, but how do we do that? What does that look like? How do we establish that within our educational system? So we've done a lot of work on this. So we studied from the knowledge development sites that Sheila mentioned earlier. We did a lot of research. We learned from a lot of different authors and experts in the field, and we tried to identify what we saw were some of the 6 key levers or areas for change to try to move from inclusion toward rightful presence. And we identified sort of our approach for strengthening capacities to support the schools that we work with, to implement and sustain systems, policies, and practices that really foster rightful presence for dynamic learners. And the 6 ways that we are doing that are within belonging, systems, leadership, equity educators, innovative teaching and learning, and growth. And so from that, we've started to develop some resources to really help educators, school leaders to, within their schools and districts, implement some of these practices. And it's organized around those 6 key levers that I just shared. And it's called an implementation guide. I'm going to be sharing it with you shortly, so showing you a little information about that. Just to give you an idea is, for the implementation guide starts with an overview. It is a series of online learning modules, and that it really breaks down some of the core components and strategic actions that schools can take to move this work forward. It also has examples and resources to support that implementation. So I'm going to share that with you now. And if you're following along with me, you can go to swiftschools.org to find this tool. And if you go to swiftschools.org, you can go to what we do. And underneath that, you will see National Center on Inclusion Toward Rightful Presence. And if you click there, it will take you to the National Center on Inclusion Toward Rightful Presence website, where you'll find the video that we just showed. And if you scroll down to below our purpose and our approach, you'll see those 6 key levers I just mentioned. And under National Resources, you'll see the Rightful Presence Implementation Guide. And you can click here to access that guide. And then you can click on Get Started, and it looks like this. So when you go there, and I'm just going to show a couple, we don't have too much time, so just quickly go through a couple of the sections so you can have an idea. And then I would really encourage you to take a look in your own time and check out some of the resources that we have here. So it starts with an overview where it just kind of describes what we mean by rightful presence, some of the information I just went over, and what our theory of action is. You'll see those 6 key levers that I just mentioned, that this is really based around. You can find a quick overview of each of those elements of our approach. So you'll see just some examples of that within within the overview, you can find out who is included, what this is for, some information about, do you need to complete the sections in order? You do not. You can skip around, which is what I'm going to be doing right now. So then you'll notice on the side, so you can go through it all in one, or you can skip around, and you'll notice on the side menu, you'll see each of the different levers that I mentioned. I'm going to start with belonging. So for each of the levers, it's broken into 3 sections. There's a core components and strategic actions, application examples, and resources to get started. I'm going to click on the core components and strategic actions for belonging, just to show you a little bit. So for that, it's going to start with a little descriptor. And then each one is going to have a table like this that breaks down some of the components of this particular lever. So if we're starting with belonging, we've identified that some of the important things that you have to do to create that sense of true belonging and a culture of true belonging is within your learning community, establish a shared understanding of rightful presence, provide resources and supports for your educators and leaders to really engage in equity reflection, to kind of analyze their own beliefs and biases and think about kind of some of the things that we have, beliefs that we have around deficit thinking and how we maybe shift some of those beliefs. It's also really important to seek critical perspectives to create a shared commitment to a culture of true belonging. So if this is something that your school system really values and wants to move forward with, it's important that it's not just one person saying this is what we're doing, but how do we really get the entire school community and learning community, their perspectives and involvement in really creating the shared commitment towards this work. And then the things that we can do to create an environment of true belonging, and then to really continuously analyze and monitor whether or not the practices and policies and things that we have in place that are going to come in part of some of these other sections, really to monitor whether those things are really aligned with the shared commitment that we came up with. So that's an example. You can find that for each of the other sections as well. There's also an applications examples section. So for each of these is where you're going to find stories from schools and districts that are engaged in some of this work. So you may find each one will start with a quote with somebody talking about this particular section, and then an example from a school or district. This happens to be one of our partner districts in Wisconsin that created a shared commitment to equity. And so we're sharing an example of their work here. I will say for each of these application examples, this is something you may want to come back and check out the implementation guide over time, because these are things that are going to be fluid and changing as we continue to collect examples from the partners that we work with. So some of these examples may be updated as we go. Each one also has, so for each of those core components, a description of an example of what a school or district can do to implement some of those core components. So this isn't saying you have to do it exactly this way. These are just some examples of what some other schools and districts have done. You can also, for each one, click on the resources to get started, and you can find some resources. Again, just like I said, the application examples are fluid and changing. The resources are also, this is a section that continues to get built out. You'll see one of the activities is coming soon, but some of the resources that are already in there, and then others as those become get developed, we'll also be sharing here. So I would encourage you to check back in the resources to get started. That was a little bit about our implementation guide, but I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. I hope you learned a little bit about rightful presence and you learned about a resource that can be a support. Please reach out to us. You can find our contact information at swiftschools.org if you have any questions or are interested in partnering. Thank you.
Welcome to OSEP Smart Beginnings. We are thrilled to be here to share some preliminary findings from what we are calling a Beating the Odds study of schools in which students with disabilities are outperforming expectations on reading and math assessments. My name is Caitlin Anderson, and I'm a researcher with the Progress Center at the American Institutes for Research. Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, my name is Stacy Hurt. I serve as the Knowledge Development Lead for the Progress Center and also a technical assistance provider. And this is my colleague, Elizabeth Hicks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Hicks, and I'm joining from Michigan State University. Thank you.
Awesome. So we are joining you today from the Progress Center, which is an OSEP-funded technical assistance center focused on providing information, resources, tools, and technical assistance services to support local educators in developing and implementing high-quality educational programs that enable children with disabilities to make progress and meet challenging goals. Our center is designed around 3 primary buckets of work. The first is knowledge development, where we've been reviewing current research, policies, guidance, collecting success stories and experiences from students, families, educators, and others to help inform and shape our work. The second area focuses on partnering with a select number of local educators and leaders to really understand what it takes to develop and implement high-quality educational programming. And the final area focuses on taking all of the information learned from those first two buckets of work and getting that information out to everyone. The center's website was up on the screen here at www.promotingprogress.org, and we will also drop that in the chat for you so you can easily access that link. So again, we're excited to share some preliminary findings from our Beating the Odds study. But first, I just want to give you a high-level overview of how we are conducting this study, which is still ongoing. Our BTO analysis is a mixed method study of practices used by schools that are beating the odds for students with disabilities in terms of reading and math achievement. We began with quantitative analyses using both state level performance on the National Assessment for Educational Progress, or NAEP, as well as school level performance on state assessments to identify our BTO schools. And we started by identifying 10 beating the odds states in which students with disabilities made progress on that NAEP assessment between 2017 and 2019. And then within each of those 10 states, we did what we call a positive outlier analysis, where we use regression techniques to identify schools that are outperforming observably similar schools in terms of the math and reading test scores of students with disabilities. In other words, we took into account things like school demographics, school size, and student-teacher ratios, and then identified which schools had higher achievement for students with disabilities than similar types of schools in the same state. The qualitative phase is where we are now, and where we are really excited to share some preliminary findings from focus groups with educators and some of these beating the odds schools. We developed our focus group protocol to align with key areas of what the Progress Center describes as a sustainable ecosystem for supporting students with disabilities, which includes things like student belonging, family engagement, staff collaboration, effective instruction and student support, and educator supports. We refined this focus group protocol based on a set of 3 pilot focus groups, and with a school district in Texas, which is the Tomball Independent School District. This is a school district that's doing really great things for students with disabilities. And now we're doing our primary data collection, focusing on 5 to 7 schools and 3 specific groups of staff in each of those schools. So we're talking to special educators, general educators, and administrators in each of these schools. And we're excited to share some preliminary findings from some of these focus groups today. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the ecosystem that serves as the theoretical framework for this study before we dig into some of our early learnings from the study. So the focus group protocol is based closely on our elements for a sustainable ecosystem to support high quality educational programming for students with disabilities. And here's a visual that the Progress Center has put together to explain these elements. For some background, originally our intent was actually to do the beating the odds analysis earlier in the life of the center and use that to inform the development of this ecosystem. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, gaps in state testing, and not being able to go into schools to conduct focus group, that plan had shifted. So to build out this ecosystem framework, we looked to other things, including working intensively with our partnership sites that we've been working with over time. These are districts and schools engaged in ongoing partnerships, and through iterative learning with us about the context of their schools and environments, we learned about what was working and what wasn't. We also looked at existing research and conducted literature reviews to better understand effective practices in the field. In addition, we convened thought leader summits and thought leader forums with experts and stakeholders, conducted focus groups with parents, families, students, and educators. And all of this work helped us to generate these essential elements. The 5 key elements are the points of the star. So these are the points of the star in blue. They're student belonging, family engagement, staff collaboration, effective instruction and student support, and educator supports. And then the items around the edges in green are the facilitating factors that make all of this work. Those 5 elements in blue, the points of the star, they can't work alone or in isolation, but need to be supported by these facilitators, like strong leadership, use of evidence-based practices, a belief in collective efficacy, data literacy, and high expectations for all students. So while this is an important framing for our Beating the Odds work, this ecosystem is also derived from and continues to inform much of the technical assistance work we do in the Progress Center. So next, I'd like to turn it over to Stacy to talk about some of the ecosystem elements in more detail.
Thank you, Caitlin. So the first ecosystem element is student belonging, or the feeling of support and security when there is a sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity for a member or a certain group. Students learn best and are most successful when they feel welcomed and have a sense of belonging at school. And it's not just about being welcome, but there are 10 dimensions of belonging, as you can see from Dr. Eric Carter. The dimensions of student belonging state that students should feel present, invited, welcome, known, accepted, supported, heard, befriended, needed, and loved. This is particularly important for students with disabilities who often do not experience the same level of belonging as their peers. So in our focus group with BTO schools, there are some clear and innovative ways that our schools are thinking about student belonging. One way is really intentionally encouraging and supporting involvement in extracurricular activities. So as noted in one of our middle schools where we conducted focus groups, they had a goal of 95% of all of its students to participate in extracurricular activities. The school actually tracks data on extracurricular involvement in school, but also outside of school in the community to identify opportunities for kids who may not be involved in an activity. These administrators in the school and its district also emphasize the importance of really knowing every kid, knowing them by their first name, and knowing things about them outside of school. Another one of our BTO schools shared positive student-teacher relationships as a critical component. One of our BTO elementary schools noted relationship mapping as key. So this relationship mapping exercise ensured meaningful connections in school. So here they identified students who identified an adult that they trusted and or a peer. If that child did not have an adult or peer, they found someone for them. So in addition, this BTO school supports relationship and community building through restorative and responsive practices, as well as community building circles. The next element, or second element, is family engagement. By this, we mean more than just meeting the procedural requirements of an IEP meeting and including parents at the IEP meeting. But here we really mean engaging families as active and meaningful partners in the development and implementation in the child's educational programming. Schools can support educators by providing time and resources for educators to engage with families. And this ensures that families and students with disabilities feel like valued members of that school community. So related to family engagement, there are several things being done in our BTO schools. First, they're organizing family learning opportunities. For example, a BTO elementary school that is beating the odds has monthly trainings where they share information with families about school priorities and initiatives. They also incorporate and model the use of circles to help build community in these trainings, which means families can learn about the restorative practices approaches as well. Another important way to promote family engagement is by maintaining consistent and regular open dialogue. A BTO elementary school is doing this through multiple forms of communication with families, including informal discussions at arrival and dismissal, hybrid meeting options, and technology applications such as the Remind app. So the Remind application can actually translate into 70 languages. And so these innovative ideas to support family engagement simplify communication and also make school communication more accessible for all families. Focus group participants in BTO schools also emphasize that this communication with families should begin with positive and proactive communication about the student. One BTO school tracks outreach data supporting positive communication. The third element that we are highlighting is staff collaboration, including effective partnership among leaders, general educators, special educators, and related service providers. The Progress Center has found in our work that staff collaboration is most effective when school leadership prioritizes staff collaboration by allocated time and resources to enable it. Some ways we are seeing staff collaboration shine through the BTO schools is through establishing professional learning communities and other specific collaboration opportunities such as common planning time and planning for intentional use of that time, so that these general educators and special educators can collaborate, plan, discuss, and make necessary adjustments and more. BTO schools are intentionally setting aside time for common planning for general educators and special educators who can co-teach together. So during this time, these educators also look at student work and analyze students' present levels and needs through an MTSS lens. This type of collaboration often requires intentional planning, such as thoughtful design of master schedules to ensure that collaborative time is protected and available. So I'm now going to hand it over to Elizabeth, and she will share the fourth ecosystem element.
Thank you, Stacy. All right. So the fourth element in the ecosystem is effective instruction and student supports. And you are seeing a graphic that shows the various types of individualized instruction and support needed to ensure students with disabilities can access and benefit from the general education curriculum. Well, with the goal of having school and post-school success. Schools with effective instruction and student supports use data to guide their decisions and implement high leverage and evidence-based practices aligned to general education expectations. In these schools, individualized programming for students with disabilities includes special education and related services alongside supplementary aids and services that are aligned to individuals' students' disability-related needs. But again, to be truly effective, all of these pieces need to be individualized and based on high leverage and evidence-based practices. So here are a few highlights from our BTO focus groups that we've looked at so far regarding how they are identifying and implementing these effective instructional practices and student supports. So one of the elementary schools we spoke with uses multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, to focus on selecting evidence-based curriculum and interventions to meet students' needs across all tiers of learning and behavior. This includes using beginning, middle, and end of the year assessment to place students in those tiers and to identify additional services or supports that may be needed. So also, a BTO middle school intentionally schedules 42 minutes each day for their WIN period. So WIN stands for what I need. During this time, about 85% of their students receive intervention in their area of need. And according to their school administration, this intervention time is, quote, flooded with support. So it's not uncommon to see a 3-to-1 student to teacher ratio during this time. So last but not least is the fifth element, educator supports. A sustainable ecosystem that supports students with disabilities requires that educators work in a supportive environment that recognizes their professional expertise and provides leadership support and ongoing access to professional learning, needed resources and materials, and opportunities for career growth. So in the BTO schools, this looks like frequent touch points and connections between teachers and experts such as literacy, math, equity, and restorative practices coaches. These schools also report a robust set of student supports, and educators benefit from those as well. So these student supports include social workers, counselors, and school psychologists. Meaningful PD opportunities for staff in a BTO middle school includes having educators read and discuss articles or listen to and discuss podcasts, in addition to those more traditional PD options. This school also delegates some of the responsibility of planning and running the PD to various teams or staff members. And in this way, the staff can focus on what's most useful and relevant to them, while at the same time building capacity within the school for leadership. So, as we mentioned earlier, the green portion of this graphic indicates the 5 facilitators that help support the ecosystem. And we're learning from these BTO schools about how they use these facilitators as well. For example, they demonstrate high expectations through strong shared beliefs that all students are capable of learning at all levels, and that, quote, all means all. The way they talk about leadership is inclusive and it's distributive. One school talked about, quote, framing leadership from a lens of love and a sense of belonging. And they talk about keeping the leadership team lean and really investing in their teachers. So there's also a sense of collective efficacy. All hands are on deck and everyone pitches in. And they feel that together they can positively affect the achievement for all students. So they're identifying and they're implementing evidence-based practices that are aligned with their students' needs. Finally, they're tracking and using data. And this makes sure that they're continuously improving. One example could be Stacy shared that they are assessing students' sense of belonging and their students' participation in extracurriculars. So that about wraps up our preliminary findings that we plan to share today. But before we go, we'd like to highlight some of the Progress Center's resources where you can learn more. So here is a link to the Progress Center website where you can access all of our information. In particular, the website has tons of resources for educators and administrators, but also for parents and families. These are online modules, tip sheets, briefs, and videos. We do have a really good variety of tip sheets. One is that we have all aspects of the IEP and some focused on parents and families specifically. And there are lots of self-paced training modules. If you want to stay up to date with Progress Center, please sign up for our newsletter on our homepage, or you can follow us on Twitter or X and Facebook. And finally, thank you all so much for joining today, and we look forward to being in conversation with you and answering any questions you may have.
Hey everyone, my name is Joe LaBelle. I'm the Director of Programs at Family Network on Disabilities down here in the state of Florida. We're the statewide Parent Training Information Center, Family to Family Health Information Center, Parents to Parents, and so much more. I am thrilled to be with you today to talk about AI and what that is looking like currently in the educational space, specifically in special education. So, what is AI and how have we been using it? AI has been around for about 2 years now in the public space. So we're talking about ChatGPT, Google Gemini, we're talking about before Gemini was Bard, all these different systems. And now I can guarantee you almost every single system you are using in your work has functions of AI built into it. So how have we been using AI? We've been using it to help constructing emails. We've been using it to help with material development. We've been using it to help with a whole litany of streamlining our work as professionals. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to break into a new conversation that we have not heard much about, which is how can we utilize AI for self-advocacy, for parent advocacy, and to help individuals with disabilities be able to articulate some of their needs and work through some scenarios. I'm also going to be talking about the way that special education professionals have been using AI in day-to-day work to support our students. Now, to start off, what is AI in general? AI is the simulation of human intelligent processes by machines. So simply put, AI is massive computing where you are able to, most of the time, speak to the AI system, whatever system that is, in natural human language. You are able to communicate with it and ask it simplistic questions so that it will give you real-time responses of whatever it is. So if it's in your data management system, you can ask it, pull a report from this date to this date and only focus on this data set. If it is helping you answer an email, here is this email that I received from this person. These are my bullet points of what I want to say. Craft this email for me. All of these things are different facets of AI, but how we're leveraging them for educational purposes, for family support, for student support, that's really where the conversation is right now. Let's get professionals trained. Let's get folks understanding the basics because it is so pervasive inside of every tool we have at this point. So most of the AI that we're working with are based on large language models, LLMs. So this data right here is looking at the human brain having over 86 billion neurofunctions or neurons. ChatGPT-3, which was one of the original ChatGPTs to really come out into the public sphere, we're now on ChatGPT 4.0 with several models in between. But ChatGPT-3 had 178 billion and was trained on 500 billion words. I like to think that I'm a smart man. I've done a lot in my life. I'm multilingual. I have nowhere near that amount of words in my vocabulary. So it's amazing to be able to see what these tools can do for us and how we can leverage them. Now, you also see in the top, the Center for Innovation, Design, and Digital Learning. I co-presented with them at the OSEP Leadership Conference. We shared a couple of our slides back and forth, so I wanted to point that out and give a thank you to them on co-collaborating on our OSEP presentation. Now, some examples of AI that you may have encountered in everyday life. AI has been around for decades. It is only the public-facing utilization of these AI tools that we are just now seeing for broad consumption. But we've had chatbots. We have had the Tesla's been out for some time now. Navigation apps where it's rerouting you. Facial recognition. I've got, whenever I'm traveling, I use the Clear program. So they scan my eyes at the airport and then I walk on through security. Text editors, social media feeds. So when you Google something, I'm looking for a new air fryer, and then all of a sudden, air fryers are all over my social media feed. That's all a part of AI. It's a part of the algorithm that we're looking at. So the Me Too. What does this mean? We've talked quite a bit at various conferences. At Smart Beginnings last year, we've spoken about at OSEP for the last couple of years, conferences across the country, how to functionally use ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Canva, like all these different tools that are coming out that are allowing us to use natural speech to create content, to answer emails, to create imagery, videos, to respond to the needs that we have as professionals. However, how are we responding to the needs that students have? And how are we preparing and training them using AI? And this is really important. I'm a person with a disability. I had an IEP from the time I was in 3rd grade until when I graduated from high school. I utilized ADA services in my undergrad and my graduate programs. And the amount of times that I had to struggle with finding my words when advocating for my own needs would have stopped so many people in their tracks. I can't tell you how many times when I had to get a waiver out of a specific course, when I had to find out how I could, or when I had to decide how I was going to self-advocate for myself in my Spanish courses or my math courses. Those are a lot where my learning disability focuses. And it was not easy. I had to be vulnerable and talk to family. I had to be uncomfortable and ask people what they thought of this or that, or I just didn't do it. Now, one of the really cool things about ChatGPT specifically, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, all three of them, you can have a full-blown conversation with it. You can give it a personality. You can give it a role. So you can say, as a youth with a disability, saying, hey, you are a mentor for a young person with a disability that has a learning disability. That's me, Joe, and I need some advice. Boom, it's just taken on that role. Now you're able to tailor that conversation back and forth. I'm really struggling with this teacher. I do not know what to do. They're not giving me accommodations. I'm not sure. Or I'm getting these accommodations, but it's not helping. And I still don't feel like I have the necessary supports. Or I feel really dumb right now. And I hate using that word. That's not anything a student should feel, but our students definitely have those feelings. And so they're able to use the language that they would use to describe the situation. And then how can I approach my teacher? What are some other ideas that I could bring to the table? My biggest challenge when I was at the IEP table was always the adult at the table look over at me and say, hey, what do you think you need to succeed in math? And I'm in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, and I never knew because we never took the time to sit down and talk about that. We never explained my options. And even when we did explain my options, it was the same 5 options we had talked about, forever. So this is a way that you're able to tailor customized strategies for that individual student. They can put in what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, areas of improvement. They can talk about their ambitions, their passions, and the AI model can take those things, obviously no personal information, but the AI model can take those things and help craft, have you thought about doing this as a solution to get to there? It's an option. Don't leave me behind. One of the things I want to be really sure that we cover in here is that we are not leaving students with disabilities out of the conversation of AI. Like I said, in the last 2 years, almost every single system we are using as professionals from all industries have AI built into it. Whether you're fully utilizing it or not, your systems have it built in. So in the next year and a half, I believe, and the data and trends are showing that almost all industries, or if not all industries, including supermarkets, including areas where we're providing internship opportunities, lots of different spaces are going to need to understand just the base components of how to use the AI for that system. When it's time tracking, when it's your vacation request, when it is helping to fill out a quick form, whatever it is, you're going to have to understand the basics for that specific program. Now, in the early 2000s and the late 1990s, being a person with a disability, going through school at that time, I saw myself and my peers were not being engaged in technology at the same level as my non-disabled peers. And I still see that working with students across the state of Florida. I still see that where I'm going into post-secondary extended transition programs, And many of the students have never used Microsoft Office. They've never used these systems that we rely on every single day in professional environments. And so when I say don't leave me behind, and I talk about ensuring inclusion and equity in the technology revolution, that's what I'm talking about. We need to make sure that this is not another repeat of what happened when computers first came to schools. We want to make sure that our students with disabilities, this is a conversation of education, not there's education and then there's special education. All students need to be taught the foundation and basics of AI, but then the ethics of AI as well. So it's really important to understand. Now, when we look at practical uses for artificial intelligence inside of organizations, there's still kind of a good format of what I've been teaching on across the country with OSEP-funded organizations, OSEP-funded centers and projects. Presentation development. So many of my presentations at this point, the first draft will go through ChatGPT of here's what I want, this is what I'm looking for, more narrowed down. So I give it this skeleton outline of what I'm looking for. I then will take that skeleton outline, I will flush it out, and then I'll put it back into ChatGPT. So I take my edited version, put it back, and then say, give me some speaker notes. And then I'll edit those speaker notes and I'll add data and I'll validate data that's being put out there. But it's really important that I'm cutting my workload down in sometimes by a week and a half that it may have taken me to put that presentation together into only a couple hours. Email assistance, I'm able to respond back to people so much faster. You can have it translate emails, you can have it translate emails you get in, going out. The translation ability of ChatGPT and Copilot is incredibly sophisticated. Policy development. We want to ensure as organizations, especially organizations that are funded by OSEP, that we are having the best policies out there. Same in educational environments. We want to make sure our policies are adhering and supporting our staff, but then also the folks who are tasked to serve and support. And this is allowing us to make sure we're staying cutting edge on what organizational policies or what educational policies we're putting in place. And then image and video generation. More and more stock imagery that we use for presentations, for graphics, for one-pagers are more expensive. They're not inclusive. And I mean, I see the same set of images all over the web when it comes to graphics for disability education and information. Now, all of these different programs, whether it's Adobe Firefly, it's Midjourney, ChatGPT, Copilot, Google Gemini, Bard was its former name. They can all create amazing images that are custom to what you're looking for. And that's really important. So there's definitely this framework of how to make all of this work when you're putting it into perspective for an educational institution, for your organization. Now, because we've only got about 20 minutes today, I want to point you down to the very bottom left of the screen, fndusa.org/AI. You're going to see this entire framework written out. Please copy it, take from it, utilize. My presentation is up there as well. It's actually an expanded presentation. So please utilize those resources. So I'm not going to go through the entire framework, but I do want you to know there are multiple phases for you to look at. Now, data analysis. Using AI for data analysis or for data collection or for data interpretation or data pulling, data in general. If you're using AI that's built into your CRM, your data management system, yeah, that's going to be pretty solid. And it should be getting you the correct information. We use Salesforce at my organization, and the data that Einstein, that's their AI, the data that Einstein pulls for us is accurate, but I validate. So I always make sure I've got a quick report that I can pull that will show me similar data validating what it pulled for me. However, if I tell it to ChatGPT, if I type in, how many students in Florida have IEPs, it's most likely not going to get me the right information. However, there's a program called Perplexity.ai. What Perplexity is going to do is it's going to search through online journals, academic articles, it's going to search through news articles and pull the data that way. And then it's going to provide you a source that it's citing. So you can actually click into that news article and say, hey, this is from 2010. I don't think that's accurate. Or, wow, this is from the Department of Ed and it's from 3 weeks ago. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and use that. We want to make sure that we're looking at how the AI is pulling our data, which is one of the reasons I really enjoy Perplexity, because Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, they will hallucinate or make things up when they are unsure about data points. So one of the things I really enjoy, I'm a big logic model guy, which is such a weird thing to say. But I'm a big fan of logic models. I think they make sense. They lay everything out in a logical way. So one of the things I really enjoy doing with some of the large language models is whenever I'm starting up either a new project, big or small, I'm going to lay everything out. I'm going to give it my inputs. I'm going to give it my goals, my outputs, and then I'm going to ask it, where are the gaps? What am I missing? Then based on that fully constructed logic model, when I'm completely done, I'm going to ask it to help me with my evaluation plan. How do I have real-time analysis? What reports should I be looking at? Forecasting of impact in the community, feedback integration of our constituents, and continuous improvement. So how do I continue everything moving forward? Now, how do we get started? This is truly exciting. We want to find champions. We want to find someone in the organization that's excited. You want to ask for their help in trying out some of these programs. No one's going to be perfect when they start. I'm not perfect now, and I've been using it for quite some time. Develop a list of prompts that your team will feel that your team can use and feel comfortable with. And then provide clear guidelines to your staff. If you're not having clear guidelines right now, I guarantee your staff is using a form of AI because it's built into every system. So let's go ahead and make sure that we're being clear, communicating, and then have a good time. Be creative and make this work for you and your organization. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm very excited to be here again. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hi, and welcome. There's got to be a better way. What LEAs need to address conflict at the local level, where we'll provide a brief overview of a study CADRE, the National Center on Dispute Resolution, commissioned to get a better understanding of LEA's early dispute resolution capacity and needs. My name is Kelly Rauscher, and I'm the Learning and Development Specialist at CADRE. And with me today is Angie Balsley, one of CADRE's fantastic senior consultants who conducted this study. For over 25 years, CADRE has been funded by OSEP to provide supports to state education agencies, lead agencies, and federally funded parent centers to build local level capacity to prevent and resolve disputes and to develop more effective and equitable dispute resolution systems. This grant cycle, there is additional emphasis on supporting states' capacity building efforts to prevent and resolve disputes at the local level. Conflict happens, especially when IEP team members with diverse perspectives and experiences come together to support a student with a disability. It's normal, natural, and it has value. And we also know that when IEP teams are unable to resolve conflict, there is often a negative impact on relationships and student outcomes. tensions and stress levels can increase, and conflict can escalate and become expensive. We are seeing a significant increase in formal dispute resolution activity across the country and are hearing from the field that tensions between families and educators are high. The 2021-2022 school year realized a jump of 47% in written state complaints filed over the prior year, with a significant increase of more than 20% over the previous 10 years average. Although the 2022-2023 annual performance report data is not yet available, state education agencies are sharing that they are seeing a significant increase from the previous year in both written state complaints and due process filings. Cadre has a history of building trusting relationships with state agencies and parent centers throughout the country, which has allowed us privileged access to view dispute resolution from multiple vantage points. Although Cadre has some insights into what is contributing to these increases in formal dispute resolution activity, we knew we needed to have a better understanding of LEA's capacity to prevent and resolve disputes early. So in the fall of 2023, we commissioned a study to gain the perspectives of special education directors across the country. And with that, Angie, it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Kelly. Our study represented 43 states and territories across the country. 98% of our respondents reported that most relationships with families are positive, and 95% shared that most IEP meetings are collaborative. However, 45% of respondents reported that they are experiencing an increase in special ed conflict that cannot be resolved without an IEP meeting. We also learned from our study that there are many proactive practices in place, and those are some that we're going to share with you today. Communication is critically important. It's essential for all parties to have early and clear communication, to be open and transparent, and it's helpful when you're able to document the communication. Of course, compliance with federal and state laws is an essential, effective routine practice, and having processes in place in school districts that result in comprehensive and accurate IEPs that are collaboratively developed with input from all team members is also an effective routine practice that emerged in this study. This slide represents a continuum of dispute resolution practices reported by the respondents. Most respondents utilize conference meetings and special education director intervention as a way to resolve concerns with families. It's also common to utilize facilitated IEP meetings and mediation. Least common is the use of an ombuds. Additional examples of a continuum of practices in school districts are awareness of how to connect with the director, collaborative problem solving, partnering with parent centers, engaging with parent advisory councils, embedding facilitation as common meeting practices, and utilizing mediation. It's essential to build relationships. To do that, districts reported that they treat parents as partners and they meet regularly and respond promptly to questions. They actively listen and respond in culturally appropriate ways and have an empathetic and human-centered approach. There's also an emphasis on customer service and addressing concerns. Empowering parents is also essential. This means educating parents on their rights and how to navigate the processes. It's also encouraging families to engage with a support person and establishing relationships with parents through a special education parent advisory committee. Continuous improvement is also essential as reported by our respondents. That includes utilizing a process that regularly evaluates special education program effectiveness by gathering feedback from stakeholders and making necessary adjustments to improve outcomes and prevent disputes. This slide represents how directors build their knowledge and skills related to dispute resolution. They leverage existing sources of support. Examples include colleagues, parent and training and information centers, organizations like CASE, and OSEP Technical Assistance Center, Cadre. Respondents reported barriers to implementing the common practices. Even with these existing sources of support, there are barriers to implementation, the most significant barrier being time. Local resources and systems was also a barrier, followed by knowledge and skills. It's essentially important that we address this implementation gap between what we know to be effective practices in dispute resolution and some of the current practices that are existing. It's important that we address the implementation gap. This leads to improved student outcomes, better relationships, satisfied parents, and teacher retention. Cadre has a continuum of dispute resolution practices on their website. You can go to the website and explore this continuum in more detail. Respondents also reported that a way to build practices is to increase collaboration between the state education agencies, parent training and information centers, and the local education agencies. Respondents also reported an opportunity to increase collaboration between state education agencies, parent training and information centers, and the local school districts. This slide represents the support that directors reported needing to build the capacity in their schools. There's a need for support in conflict engagement, coaching others through conflict, facilitation skills, and establishing a continuum of the dispute resolution options at the local level. That's a brief overview of this presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly to share some more resources about Cadre.
Districts have an opportunity to leverage the numerous resources and materials available from Cadre as they look to increase their capacity to prevent and resolve disputes early. You can find resources such as highly valued online learning series, publications, and webinars on Cadre's website, www.cadreworks.org. Educators and administrators may find it easiest to find the most relevant resources by navigating to our new portal for districts, which includes an FAQ, publications, videos and study guide, interactive online learning series, and facilitator guide, a building local level capacity portal, which houses resources related to findings from this study, and webinars. Lastly, if you are interested in updates from Cadre, subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the presenters from the National Center on Inclusion Towards Rightful Presence, Progress Center, Family Network on Disabilities, and Cadre. All excellent presentations full of great information. We will now begin the question and answer portion of the session. At this time, I'd like to invite our presenters to join me on screen. We will address questions prepared for the panel first, then we'll revisit the chat for any additional questions. We absolutely appreciate how busy the chat has been, and at this point it looks like we're caught up on answers, but we encourage you to continue posting your questions. I'm going to go ahead and get started with a question for Tessie. What Progress Center resources and supports are available to support schools as they move to beat the odds?
Thanks, Rhonda. I will say over the last 5 years, we've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work in terms of supporting local educators. And to share really what we've learned from what works and what doesn't work is we collaborated with local sites, including 60 educators and residents, families, students with disabilities, and national experts, and developed a lot of the resources that we have available on the promotingprogress.org. And I will say, we hear a lot about there's just so much out there and it may be a little bit overwhelming, is that when we developed the resources, we really focused on what was fair, F-A-I-R, and we think about what is feasible, what is acceptable, what's impactful, and what's relevant in terms of ensuring students with disabilities can experience that post-school and school success. And our Beating the Odds sites are really sort of helping us refine and confirm the resources. Some of those were shared in the presentations, but I do want to just let folks know that there are these available direct supports, both virtual and face-to-face, that are available for school sites. Our online self-paced modules, what we found is that those are a good way to get started, particularly for new educators. And some folks have actually taken those modules and embedded them in their own LMS to build their capacity. I think the other thing, it was mentioned by a couple of folks, are some of these more accessible tip sheets and resources to get that information to folks at the ground level. And something else that's going to be coming out over the next couple of months that I want to share is a suite of impact stories that really provide practical examples of how these things are being implemented. I think from our work, we found that sometimes it seems abstract and they need to see it in action. So there's a series of videos and stories from local educators.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tessie. The next question is for Caitlin. Caitlin, how will we know when the final Progress Center BTO is done?
Sure. Thanks for that question. We anticipate that we'll complete the Beating the Odds in spring of next year, so spring of 2025. And you can follow our social media, such as Facebook and X at K12 Progress, and also sign up for our newsletter. And we can make sure to put that information and some links in the chat. And that way you can find out when we release the report or plan to present the results. And we'll also be sharing at some national conferences, such as the Council of Administrators of Special Education, or CASE, and the Council of Exceptional Children, or CEC, as well as sharing some results through our partner, the LEAD IDEA Center. So stay tuned for all of that.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for that, Caitlin. The next question is for Kelly. Kelly, I'm going to present you with a scenario. My district has seen an increase in contentious IEP meetings and due process cases. I know there is a need to build capacity to prevent and resolve disputes earlier. Where do I start?
Okay, well, to begin with, I think it depends. For most people, I would suggest exploring Cadre's website, especially for our 4 districts tab. And then also our Building Local Level Capacity page, where we guide people through some key considerations and have links to tools and resources. We also have additional information and materials on the LEA study that we conducted, and the full publication will be coming out soon. You may also want to check out our archived webinar with Poway School District on the transformative power of parents as partners for inspiration and ideas. And that webinar can be found on the 4 district landing page that we shared earlier. For those that are a little further along, we really encourage you to assess your district's current capacity and needs. Looking at your data, what is it telling you? What isn't it telling you that you still need to know? What are your families saying? And then build on the strengths and prioritize the gaps to be addressed.
Fantastic. Thank you. Kelly, I have another question for you. Time is hard. How do you make time for building local level dispute resolution capacity when you have so many other competing priorities?
Yes,
I hope you have the magic answer to that.
That is always the question. I think there are a number of quick wins that districts can implement right away. And some of that is communicating with families who they should contact if they have questions or concerns. That sounds like a really simple strategy, and many are doing it, but there are some that it's not clear on like their website who families should be contacting if they have a concern. So that's a quick win that districts can implement, is to make sure that it's easy for families to get that information. And then leveraging some of Cadre's existing resources by linking to our website. And we have both a 4 districts portal, and then we also have a 4 family section. Subscribing to our newsletter, like we mentioned, and then sharing it with others. And one of the things that, or strategies I think is really helpful is debriefing with colleagues when you have a contentious IEP meeting and discuss what proactive practices might have helped with communication or collaborative problem solving and productive conflict engagement. What steps can be taken to help repair the relationship and ensure a more collaborative meeting in the future. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that the time and cost savings that can be realized from prevention and early resolution efforts, due process can be an extremely time-intensive and expensive process that can potentially be avoided through effective early resolution efforts at the local level.
Thank you, Kelly. So we have a lot of great resources mentioned through the Progress Center, through Cadre. The next question is for Joe, and I'm sure Joe's going to have some great resources to share as well. Joe, how do families receive technology and supplies for their children with disabilities who are homeschooled? Do you have suggestions for parents who may be in our audience today?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different ways that families who are homeschooling their children can access these advanced technologies or different tools to support their students. So first and foremost, keeping up with trends in workforce readiness, which is technology is a huge part of that. So as you're in part of these homeschool Facebook groups, these homeschool parent engagement groups, identifying what the trends are that other parents are seeing in curriculum as we start looking towards post-secondary, and that's going to include different portions of technology. So once you're identifying, hey, this is a new trend that I'm seeing, how can I engage with it? Maybe that parent or that guardian is not the best person to provide that in-depth training or education on this specific area, but there's lots of folks out in the community that are able to help provide that supplemental conversation with either a group of students that are being homeschooled. I actually gave a presentation to a group of families and students on AI that were being homeschooled as part of our PTI mission. So that's definitely something that you can look to as our community partners that are able to help supplement and fill some of those gaps. But that's definitely something that we want to be aware of, is keeping ahead of the trends, identifying what community partners can help supplement areas, and then looking for creative ways to utilize funding. So like, would one of the waiver program funding models be able to help pay for subscriptions to things like Copilot or ChatGPT or other forms of AI for that student's educational benefit? So all things to consider and be aware of as you're working in that space.
I love it, Joe. Thank you so much. Joe, you actually had another question that just came into the chat for you. And by the way, there's lots of great feedback for you in the chat. So I hope that you'll take an opportunity to take a look at that. But the question that just came in was, how can I access the guidelines that Joe has on his slides for use of AI?
Yeah, so all of my slides and the guidelines and the framework are on the landing page that I put together. So it is fndusa.org/AI. That's also in the chat, pushed out to all the folks attending today. And you'll see the framework, you'll see different tools and resources that I've put up there for everyone, and feel free to use them, grab them, and hopefully implement some really exciting work.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. We do not have any additional questions in the chat, but I do want to open it back up to the presenters. If you have a final thought, or if some of these other questions have triggered something that you want to share with our audience today before we start to close out the first day of the Smart Beginnings virtual conference. Presenters?
Thank you for the opportunity to have us here. We really appreciate it.
Well, we absolutely love having you all here. Your presence is fantastic. The knowledge you're sharing is tremendous. And we invite you to continue to support us in our Smart Beginnings web series every year. The feedback has been tremendous.
And I just want to say one thing from the Progress Center, from the just working directly with schools. And I know some of you out there, as you're getting into the start of the school year, in the schools that we've been working with and have identified as beating the odds, is it took time. And we have several videos. So I just want to say, don't feel like you're going to make it all, happen this year. But some of the schools that we work with, it was a systematic process over, about 5 years to really get them to the sustainability of promoting progress for students. So I will just say, take it slow. Make sure you have a very clear path for where you're going. Partner with others who are trying to do that, including your parent organizations, the national centers that exist. IRIS, for example, has a ton of resources as well, and we haven't mentioned those guys. But to really be, I think, go slow to go fast to get to that beating the odds.
I think that's a really great point. Go slow to go fast. Thank you so much. I'm Rhonda Sortino, and I work in the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, in the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division. On behalf of OSEP and all of our presenters, thank you again for joining us today. If you have additional questions for our presenters, please enter your questions into the chat. We will communicate answers to any additional questions through email outreach. Following the conclusion of the Smart Beginnings 3-day conference, you will be able to access the recordings from this year's event and access Smart Beginning presentations from previous years at the Ideas That Work website. The Ideas That Work website. We will send all participants a link to the recordings and slides once they become available. As we close today's virtual conference, I want to remind all participants that you can earn continuing education units for participation in this year's conference. At the conclusion of the three-day event, after this Thursday, an email will be sent to all participants with instructions on how to apply for the CEUs. In closing, please accept our sincere appreciation for your shared commitment to the high-quality education and support of our infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families. Thank you again for your participation today, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Have a great evening.